$10,000. Can you make that raising pastured poultry on just 1 acre? Yes, you can. Stay tuned to find out all about it coming up in this episode of Grassfed Life. Welcome to Grassfed Life. I'm your host, Diego, D-I-E-G-O. Here at Grassfed Life, Darby Simpson, he's the farmer you'll hear on all these episodes, and myself, Diego, we have one goal. We want to see you be successful in your farm venture. Successful however you define it. Maybe that's farming on the side, maybe that's farming full-time. So to help you be successful, we've created a lot of resources at grassfedlife.co. Resources like this podcast. Resources like workshops, both in person and online. And resources like the upcoming preview, hint, hint, Grassfed Life Insider. There are all different ways that you can learn about this sector, learn about your business, and be more profitable on pasture. Be sure to check out everything that we offer and stay tuned for the upcoming Grassfed Life Insider at grassfedlife.co. For today's episode, Darby and I are taking on one, quote, myth. $10,000 an acre profit pastured poultry. Is it possible? Is the myth true? We're going to talk about Darby's thoughts on that, his experiences with that number, and his records about that number. So let's jump right into it and talk about how much money you could potentially make on just 1 acre raising and selling pastured poultry. One of the biggest criticisms that I've heard about farming since day one when I got into the sector, starting to do permaculture voices back in 2012, was you can't make a living farming. And Salatin's one of the people out there saying that you can do it, but people don't tend to believe it. $50 an hour is what your numbers say is possible with pastured poultry, yet even people doing pastured poultry like to say not possible, call BS, and they want to discredit that number. $50 an hour pastured poultry, is that legit? Is that possible?
Oh yeah, it's absolutely possible. We've been doing that for years on our farm. Actually, frankly, that's kind of that's at the low end of the spectrum of what we have come to expect here. Now, I do want to qualify that. That's on my labor. That's on my day-to-day management with the animals. That doesn't take into consideration, I've got to do a marketing post on Facebook or reply to this email or go to the farmer's market. I'm just looking at my labor, and $50 an hour is absolutely doable. We've actually had a couple of times where we've had some birds that just really performed super well, and based on the product we got back, when we're looking at our labor hours, we've actually hit triple digits per hour.
So that's a pretty nice hourly wage. I think most people who come from, say, an employed world, looking at the self-employed world, that's either going to be an upgrade in wage or it's a sideways move. I hear $50 an hour. I'm like, okay, that works. Like, I can support a family off of $50 an hour. With $50 an hour going to the labor itself, let's dig a little bit into that. So when you come up with that number, that's everything that it takes you to raise them from chicks, including time in the brooder, to getting them back home from the processor and put into the freezer.
Yep, that's literally every man hour from going to the post office and picking them up until we put the last bird into the freezer or pass out the last bird to our bulk customers, and everything in between. It's all that day-to-day management. And $50 an hour is a great wage. I think, one thing I need to mention here is, you're not going to be spending 40 hours a week, on labor with poultry. right? So we spend, when they're in the field, it's about 3 man hours per day, 7 days a week. So there's only 20 hours a week there. And if you're raising 3 or 4 or 5 batches a year, it's not like you're coming up with, 2,000 hours a year at $50 an hour. But again, what I want to stress is, like, when I'm working in that enterprise, like, that's my bare minimum that I want to make for that enterprise. And then, of course, we've got other enterprises on our farm that we stack a lot of stuff together so that we do have more labor hours per week. And it's, generally speaking, it's been a nice living wage for our family. It'd be nice to make more, but we've been able to make it work and provide for a family of 4 with our farm.
And I wanted to start with that number because I think it's really important for anybody considering doing something within the farm space. You're going to want to know how much you're going to get paid for the time that you're putting into something. So having a rough metric of here's how much I can get paid for my time can help people give the decision of no-go. Does this make sense? And if you have a small amount of land, which we'll get to a little later, and 20 hours a week, $50 an hour on the side is a nice way to get started. Now, I guess the caveat here is, one, like, it might not be $50 an hour on your first batch because you do have to work out kinks like anything else. You do have to start to build up a customer base. But once you get going, $50 an hour is pretty nice. And if you look at how a lot of people transition into this space, they go from homestead to farmstead or homestead to farm. It's a way to take something you're doing on a homestead to provide for your family, for a hobby, really on the fulfillment side of things, and start to get paid a pretty good wage to do that thing that you like doing without that much work. So if you're raising 50 broilers on a homestead, to do a batch of, say, 250 and get paid $50 an hour to do it, if I'm a homesteader and I'm at all entrepreneurial and I want to go off homestead and do the marketing, that's a pretty attractive offer that I'm not sure enough homesteaders put enough time into thinking through.
Yeah, absolutely. A couple things you said there. Yeah, you're not going to make that much money on your first batch. You're not going to make that much money per hour until you get into this for a couple of seasons, 3 seasons, to kind of like figure out your management. And you can start to scale up your marketing as your management gets better, as you build your customer list. I mean, that's what we did. I think that's what most producers do. You kind of start out small, you get some of the mechanics down, and then you start to scale up. And as you scale up, there are new challenges, certainly. But getting to a point of scale and having a really solid marketing list, those are very key components to getting to this wage. Economies of scale come into play in anything we talk about. It doesn't matter what business it is. It's absolutely true. It's true in farming. It is especially true when we are talking about pastured poultry, especially like if you're like myself and you've got to drive 90 minutes each way to a processor. There's a lot of time there. We've got between 100 to 110 hours in a batch of chickens. And I can tell you that, from a man-hour standpoint, about 20% of those man-hours are going towards getting the birds loaded up to the processor, back home from the processor, and into the freezer. That's a big, huge chunk. So, you make a whole lot more money, however you want to slice this, per bird, per hour, per batch, per acre, if you can haul 500 chickens instead of 200 chickens. And again, that goes hand in hand with your marketing. Like, you've got to build your customer base and your marketing prowess as you scale your physical enterprise to kind of coincide. They really do lockstep together. But yeah, these are not crazy numbers. Really, the only holdback is, how many chickens can I go market in a year in my region at this price point, from a retail standpoint. Certainly, if you're doing wholesale, you gotta raise a whole lot more birds per batch to get up to numbers like this. But if you're more micro and you're a whiz at marketing, and maybe nobody else is doing this in your area, or maybe you found that niche where it's like, hey, I'm the only soy-free organic guy and I can charge more. Like, these are all things that come into play, and this is where the variation starts to take shape within each enterprise on each farm, and that's kind of exciting, to sit back and watch how people formulate, their business to make this a reality.
Yeah, the marketing side of things always gets thrown out there of, I can't sell for that much, or my market won't support it. I can't sell enough. But, marketing is a tenet of any entrepreneurial venture that you start, farming or otherwise. Like, any business it's a marketing game. You need to get customers in the door, whether that's Subway, a pizza shop, a microbrewery, a pastured poultry enterprise. So, I don't like the excuse of I can't sell enough or I can't do it. I just think the person saying that can't figure it out or doesn't know how to figure it out. Because I think every location in the country will support this type of product. That doesn't mean you can walk out your door and go to your neighbor next door and sell it. But within some amount of reasonable driving distance, you can find a market for this. Unless you're in the middle of North Dakota or something like that. But then you got Gabe Brown, who will be on the podcast later on, who's done really well up in the high plains selling his product. So I don't like the marketing excuse. I don't like the idea that I can't find customers. I mean, I look at what Primal Pastures has done on their land, where we're going to have the upcoming workshop in March. They started small. They didn't own land. They started with $2,000 to get their enterprise going. You started with $600. And when I think about businesses that can pay $50 an hour, that you can start at with a let's say $5,000 investment. I don't consider a $5,000 investment to start a business that much. But to be able to start a business that can generate $50 an hour work at profit margins that are in the 50% plus range, with a $5,000 and under starting cost, and then everything's more or less free, like your infrastructure is paid for, and your cash flow sustaining costs aren't that high relative to other businesses, it's a pretty attractive offer. So I often think the naysayers look at this stuff and they cherry pick the negatives, and they overlook all of these advantages that pastured poultry has. And instead of trying to say, how can I take advantage of these and apply these advantages to my situation, they'll focus on the negatives, and it's just like an excuse for inaction. But if, again, you go back to when you started, $600 got you started. It got you selling. Not much you can do with $600 these days if you want to go start a business that's actually legitimate and can grow into something.
Yeah, I think back now, man, what if I would have been like Paul Grieve and started with $2,000 or $5,000? I think if somebody had that much capital today, you could really speed up the whole process. We started with that $600. We used what we could afford to live without, and it definitely slowed the process a whole bunch. And it took me a couple, 3 years to really kind of get the mechanics down to where we could get some really nice birds produced, weight-wise. I mean, we kind of struggled with that for a while. That's part of the learning curve. Part of what, we try and do here with things like this podcast or, some of the courses we have is to shorten that learning curve and get people more profitable faster. But, there aren't a whole lot of businesses that you can start for less money. I mean, it really just doesn't take a whole lot to start one of these operations. The great thing about poultry is the fast ROI, the fast turnaround on your cash. I mean, you get birds tomorrow, in less than 9 weeks from now, you're selling that product. It's the closest thing there is to a quick turnaround crop in the veg world on the livestock side. And you can make very good money per acre. And there are so many different ways to look at this. I've thrown out the $50 an hour. Again, we've had batches, and it's not every batch, okay? But we've had batches where we've had that come back at over $100 an hour. But at the end of the day, I'm always trying to double my input. And when I'm doing 500 birds, and this is using organic feed, okay, we are around $12 a bird start to finish. So then I'm wanting to double that. I'm wanting to make $12 a bird on a whole chicken. If I'm retailing that thing out piece by piece, I'm shooting to make $20 a bird, and that all plays into this. You've got to do the math. You got to run the numbers. You've got to charge adequately for your time. I tell people this all the time. I left engineering to do this. I've got a family to support, and this is just me in my personal context. But I went into this with the mindset of, I believe in this. I believe in real food. I believe in the mission. I believe in repairing the land. And that's all fine and good. But at the end of the day, from a business standpoint, if hope is not a strategy. This has got to pay the bills. It's got to pay the mortgage. It's got to feed and clothe my kids. And that's how we went at this. Like, we're going to charge appropriately. And if it doesn't pay, then this will be a pure homestead function. And we'll do something else on the farm, or people will pay us well for our labor and for our time. I don't like the excuse about marketing. Now, there are instances, and I've talked to people that literally live out in the middle of Wyoming, and the nearest town of 20,000 people is 5 hours away. That's tough. That's hard. That's not most people. If you're within 2 hours of a metropolitan area that's in excess of 50,000 people, you have a group of people to market to. 2 hours is not too far to drive. It's just not. Driving 2 to 2.5 hours for a slam dunk, rockin' farmer's market, totally worthwhile. Totally worthwhile. You've got to put the effort in to do the marketing, to get yourself in front of people that will pay that price point that you need to make this thing tick.
Yeah, I mean, there's opportunities everywhere for businesses to plug in. Like, you just got to be creative to find the ways to plug in. Like, if you're that town that's within 2 hours of some area that has a larger population, there's probably somebody there selling something at a premium. Maybe that's beer, maybe it's wine, maybe it's food. But they're in every space, in every area, there's a premium product that someone is buying. They're paying more. And they're not going to Walmart or your local grocery store to buy that product. They're paying up because they want it. I mean, one example is they just opened this coffee place by me, which I think is a chain. It's called Cat and Craft, or Cat and Coffee, something like that. It's a coffee shop that they have cats in, and you can go in there and sit and pet the cats while you have coffee. But you can't just walk in and pet the cats for free. You have to pay to pet the cats, and then you have to pay to buy the product. And it's like $12 an hour to pay to get in just to pet the cats. And their mission is to expose people to cats so they can then have those cats get adopted. So you think $12 an hour to go in there and pay to pet a cat, and you're buying food and you're buying coffee. Who's going to pay that? They had 200 people apply for barista jobs. They have a waiting list and a schedule that is full beyond belief. So when you think nobody's going to pay it, somebody's going to pay it. They were just creative to find a niche and a unique selling proposition that made people curious to want to do it. I think you can do that in the meat space too. So again, I don't think marketing is a problem here. It's not for everybody, and it's not for every location, like you said, but it can be overcome, and the right person can overcome it if they want. The other big excuse that you hear people come up with is just land. I can't afford land. And when I look at land, I think, okay, land really isn't an issue. We go back again to Primal Pastures, where we're having the workshop coming up in March. They didn't own a huge amount of land. I think their initial home property for their home farm was like 5 acres. And this is in Southern California that is rain deficient with not this nice pasture on it. And they made it work. And then they went out and partnered and leased land. So I think land is possible. And if you want to put a metric to that, you've used this metric in the past, $10,000 an acre profit, not gross profit, meaning expenses minus costs or sales minus costs, profit greater than $10,000 an acre. When you say $10,000 an acre making pasture poultry, what's the common response you hear to that from the naysayers?
Oh, I've been accused of lying, making figures up, not including every little penny in all of my costs. You name it, I've heard it. And I walk through all that in the course. There's actually a free, pretty full-length presentation on the Grassfed Life YouTube channel about raising poultry that I walk through everything on, and I lay out in the spreadsheet, like, these are all of our direct costs. Now, I do avoid in that presentation indirect amortized expenses for a number of reasons.
First, what do you mean by those? Indirect amortized expenses, that's what people are calling you out on. What are they?
Yeah, so the indirect stuff would be like, okay, well, you had to buy a chicken crate, and there's not a dollar amount per bird for that chicken crate, or your chicken tractor. Or I had one guy barking at me about, well, I don't see anything for the cost of diesel fuel. And my question to him was, okay, when I go out in my side-by-side and I'm using diesel fuel, the first thing I do is I stop and check on the pigs. Then I go take care of the chickens. Then we'll stop and see, okay, do the laying hens need anything? Then we go set up the lines to rotate the cows. And then I go back. It's like, well, where do I apply those pennies of diesel fuel? That's just a farm expense, and it's a drip in the bucket at the scale we're at. I mean, our little farm here in 2018, we grossed over $200,000 in sales. So you can go back and look at things, but I'm looking at chicken. I've got chicken crates that are literally 12 seasons old. So when you start doing the math on the number of chickens that I put in those chicken crates over the years, it's like sub 10 cents per chicken. Our chicken tractors are like sub 3 cents per chicken tractor. These are just these little nuanced costs that, yeah, sure, if you want to put them in there, you can. And on the front end, they'll kill you because you've got to go build your chicken tractors. If you want to build a John Siskovich chicken tractor, it's $200, $220. My chicken tractor's $350. But I look at that like that's a one-time upfront fixed expense. If I've got a soda shop and I've got a refrigerator, I'm not going to amortize the cost of a cooler to keep the soda cold on every can of soda pop I sell, right? And I kind of look at this as I look at this the exact same way. You've got these upfront fixed costs. I've had people want to apply the entire cost of liability insurance just to the chicken enterprise, and again, it's like, okay, well, that's $300 a year amortized over $200,000. You've got to amortize that over the gross sales of your business to see like how hard is it hitting each enterprise. But these are some of these indirect costs that they vary wildly from farm to farm. And again, early on, if you're raising 200 broilers a year and you're paying a $300 liability policy, sure, you've got $1.50 a chicken. Just if you're just letting the chickens carry the cost of that liability insurance policy. But again, as you scale up and you get to the scale we are, which really isn't all that big, Diego. We've been 2,000 to 3,000 chickens a year for the last 8-9 seasons. I mean, that's just not that many chickens. but it really spreads the cost of all these variables out over lots of animals, lots of enterprises, to a point that I'm not saying you shouldn't care, you should be aware of them, but I'm not going to spend hours upon hours trying to, well, I got another 17 cents in every chicken. At the end of the day, like, who cares?
Yeah, I mean, I'm in a similar situation with Paper Pot. I mean, I might buy $300 a year worth of tape, but I'm not putting a tape cost on every product I sell. It's factored in there, and it's small in the big scheme of things. The other thing I don't factor in is, let's say, labor. For example, this morning I had to spend an hour playing around with the storefront software to reconfigure a product. Well, do I bill that hour to the cost of products now going forward? And do I have like a running total of how much time I've put into every product? No. It's like part of this is just part of running a business, and there kind of has to be this, I'll say, a fudge factor or a margin that absorbs some of these costs that you can't track to a unit precisely, because they're either one-offs, they're kind of emergency things, or they are amortized over a whole bunch in the long term. And the way I do this, like when we look at taking on a new product, is I just add on at the very end 5% to the cost. So I take, okay, what am I going to have to pay for the product? What's it going to cost me to package it like a box? How much time am I going to spend packaging it, assuming I'm paying someone or me X dollars an hour? And then I come up with some cost, and I just say multiply that by 1.05. And then that's the cost I make my go, no go decision against when I'm looking at pricing, because I figure, well, 5%, it's going to average out. Sometimes that's too high. Sometimes it's a little bit too low, but it's going to capture all of these dribbles of diesel fuel, and the one time you needed to go buy extra feed in a pinch and you had to pay more or something like that. But I think being penny wise, pound foolish, and focusing on the minutia of stuff, I don't want to offend people by saying it, but it applies a little bit of, I would say, business immaturity, because those details aren't critically important. Like if you're weighting factors that go into profitability, those are definitely costs that should be accounted for, but they are not the make it, break it, go, no go decisions. And really at the end of the day, like your biggest expenses into pastured poultry are, I mean, if your chicken tractor is 3 cents, your biggest expenses are what, 3,000 times or 300 times that level? Like, the processing cost, I mean, that's what's going to matter.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why I'm looking at, like, what are all of my direct consumable costs? So when anybody who's interested, again, look at that free presentation on the YouTube channel. I break it all down. I've got, here's the cost of the chicks. Here's the cost to get them shipped to my farm. Here's the cost of the bedding, the electricity in the brooder, the fuel to haul them to the butcher, the fuel to pick them up from the butcher, the processing costs, all the feed, right? I've got all these things in there, all these direct expenses. Whereas an expense like, again, I'll pick the liability policy. That's kind of an umbrella expense. That's a liability policy for everything the farm does. It doesn't matter if it's doing $200 a year in sales or $200,000 a year in sales. It costs what it costs. And there's nothing I can do about that except try and amortize that expense over more production, more products that I'm selling to my customer base. And it's exactly like you said, you start getting bound up in all this stuff. And to one of these gentlemen that referred to me as a liar on all these numbers, I went through and said, okay, here are my indirect costs, and if you really want to know, this is what it would look like, and it took my cost per chicken up less than 25 cents a chicken, based on what I did the year prior. Just doing some quick calculating, Not trying to go through and figure out, okay, exactly how many gallons of diesel fuel did I use, but looking at all these things, this is what I came up with, about a quarter per chicken, when all my other costs totaled together are about $12 a chicken. At the end of the day, honestly, I just don't care. You kind of fall into that I'm going to spend $1 to save a dime mindset, and it's just not a good use of time.
Well, I've heard people like Connor Crickmore at Neversink, Ben Hartman at Clay Bottom Farm on the veg side talk about this. At some point, the data becomes, you're starting to waste time by getting too much into the data, because you can collect a whole bunch of data. You can keep zooming in and zooming in, but your time you're spending is really worth more than what you're getting from that data. Like, you're not gaining anything by knowing that your cost is $3.23.62 versus $3.23. So zooming in on this minutia, it matters or it doesn't. I guess each person has to decide. And then what I just would encourage these people to do is, put it in, make your own spreadsheet then. Run off your numbers, which, quote, leave a bunch out. Well, add some extra lines to the spreadsheet for your own numbers and then see how much the numbers change and play it out. One thing that I hear people say when they hear $10,000 an acre is, well, you're not counting the land cost. How would you factor in land costs, or how would you think about land costs when it comes to $10,000 an acre pastured poultry?
Well, in my context, I put the cost of the land, which I have to lease back from my family, on the cost of the cows. Because that's the main reason we're leasing as much property as we are, is for the cows. We're grazing about 50 acres with our cattle herd. Running 3 to 6 batches of chicken per year. I'm covering 3 to 6 acres with chickens. So it's really not fair, and at least in my book, to put that land lease cost on the poultry enterprise. Now, if all you're doing is poultry and you've got to go lease some property, well, by all means, you're going to have to do that. Around here, like, what I pay for land is $130 an acre. Now, there's a gentleman that'll be on an upcoming podcast with you and I here soon. His name's Adam. He's up in northern Indiana, which is like prime farm ground. And, acreage up there, it's like $300 an acre. But when we're talking about the sales figures that are being thrown about here, again, if you've got to lease land at $300 an acre to run an enterprise where you're grossing $15,000-$16,000 an acre, my comment is next. I care more about how can we get your feed bill down.
Yeah, I mean, if you just look at that on a 100 bird batch, let's say you just only raised 100 birds and paid $300 an acre. So you have $3 a bird into land, and it takes your cost from 12 to 15. You're selling it for 25. You're still making $10, $10 profit on a $15 investment. That's good margins in any business.
Absolutely. And that's where I get really excited and focus on, okay, how can we leverage what you had to invest in, right? You had to invest in a brooder. You had to invest in liability insurance, a farmer's market booth, whatever, chicken crates, right? They're expensive, and it doesn't matter if you put 10 chickens in a crate one time a year, or 10 chickens in a crate 10 times a year. That chicken crate costs you $60. So let's try and, again, amortize that fixed cost over as many units as possible by getting really serious and creative with our marketing, so we can scale up our business to really help our bottom line. And along those lines, something else I hear a lot is, I can't get my economies to scale up. I can't get my batch size up, which sometimes that's just someone being negative or not being confident enough in going out and marketing this product. sometimes that's a very legitimate thing. And I've got a great case in point. There's a gentleman out in, I think it was Oregon, that I did a consult with probably about a year and a half ago. And, he was kind of to this point, he was into that like second to third year. And that's really where things for a lot of poultry producers start to heat up. Like, okay, I've kind of got the mechanics figured out. I've got a lot of my equipment's bought and paid for. I don't have to buy those chicken crates again. I've got my chicken tractors built. I've got my customer base built up. Now I'm ready to scale up. Well, he ran into a pretty big problem. Like myself, he was taking his birds to a processor that was like 2 hours away. The log jam in his system was the processor. They are only set up to do 250 birds in a day, which is still quite a few birds. But anybody who's played around in Excel with chickens will tell you, like, you can go from, $20 or $30 an hour profit on your labor to 50 by scaling up from like 300 birds to 500 birds in a batch. Well, he couldn't do that because of his processor, or so he thought. So in this consult, I'm talking with him, and I'm like, so tell me about your processor. What can we do to help the processor? Well, there really wasn't a whole lot we could do to help the processor to like make them any more efficient. But he did tell me, it's like, now if I can guarantee them 250 birds, like they'll process for me 2 days a week. And I said, so like would they process on a Wednesday and a Thursday, or like a Wednesday, Friday? And he said, yeah, absolutely. I said, okay, this is what we're going to do. You're going to start running, 500 birds at a time. Okay, well, what's that do? Brings your feed costs down massively. Because now when you're ordering feed for 500 instead of 250. You get a price break. You get to, get a price break most likely on the chicks you're ordering, But the big savings come in. I'm not going out to the field to take care of 250 chickens every day. I'm going out to the field to take care of 500 chickens. And you start to figure out after a couple seasons in poultry that, like, if it takes me an hour to take care of 250 chickens, it's going to take me like an hour and 20 minutes to take care of 500 chickens. Like, it just function stacks. Your efficiencies skyrocket. And what we were able to get structured for this guy was, okay, he's going to basically schedule back-to-back butchering days at his butcher so that he can raise 500 birds at a time. He's going to take 250 on Wednesday, and then he's going to go back Thursday morning, and he's going to drop off the next 250. He's going to pick up the first 250, take them home, and then, yeah, he does have to make a third trip to pick up that second 250 on Friday. So he does have one extra trip in there. Instead of 2, he's making 3. But everything else, we just created a massive economies of scale. His cost per bird went down a whole bunch. His profitability went way up. And guess what, Diego? He wasn't going out and raising 8 batches of 250 birds per year. He was able to do 4 batches of 500, and he darn near cut his labor in half because of that one thing. That's 4 trips to the post office instead of 8. It's getting the brooder set up 4 times instead of 8. It's hauling the birds out to pasture 4 times instead of 8. It just cuts everything in half. And those are the kinds of creative things that you've got to think about when you say, I can't get my economies of scale up because. Well, let's look at that. Let's dissect this problem. What can we do to make this better? I've had the same conversation with John Siskovich because he kind of runs into the same thing. It's his processor, right? Like, they can only do so many birds at a time. And I pitched him on this. He's like, it makes a whole lot of sense, And then you've got all this off time where you don't have birds on farm. And that's really exciting in the summer because, like, you can actually go do stuff and have fun.
Yeah, so a lot of possibility with pastured poultry, a lot of flexibility. And I think it is definitely the gateway drug for anybody looking to get into raising livestock. It's accessible from a cost standpoint. It's accessible from a land standpoint. I think it's accessible from a time standpoint. I mean, in this episode, we're showing $10,000 on an acre, $50 an hour to get paid to do all that work. If you think about somebody who's working a main job and they want to start this on the side, or somebody who has a part-time job, or they're a stay-at-home mom, a stay-at-home dad, and they want to raise pastured poultry on the side, where it's never going to be a big thing. Like this, they're not looking to make this their main income. It's call it an amplifier of opportunity for the family, because it's going to bring extra cash in where somebody's taken time that they otherwise had to maybe do nothing, and it's going to turn that into cash at a good hourly rate, which might be, again, a higher hourly rate than they're getting paid at in their day job. If somebody came to you in this situation and they're looking at pastured poultry part-time to give their family bonus income, more opportunities, how would you start to talk through this with them? Does this make sense to fulfill what they're going for?
Yeah, I think so. It's a bit more intense from a labor standpoint than, a cow or a pig, but it's so easy to turn it on and off. For a lot of people, it's really especially easy to say, okay, we're going to do a spring batch and a fall batch, right? We're going to do it twice a year. So that, kind of leaves most of the summer open. And, a lot of families are kind of looking for that. They really kind of need like 1.5 incomes to make it. Particularly so possibly, like when one of the parents wants to stay home, maybe homeschooling their kids is really important to them. I think it fills that niche really well. I think another thing it does, Diego, and you alluded to this early on in this recording, was, homesteaders. Like if you're already out there doing the work, like I get just doing it for yourself, but I really think you should explore, like, could we sell a couple $100 or a couple of hundred birds a year just to offset, if nothing else, our chicken? Like if we could earn our chicken for free, quote unquote, just by, for our labor, is that a good trade? I think a lot of people would say yes, but I think this is a great farm setting venture, call it part-time, poultry enterprise on the side for any number of reasons. Maybe it's to help put a kid through college. Maybe it's to take that really nice dynamic family vacation once a year. Maybe it's so one of the parents can stay home. It really can fill that void, particularly if you're on some smaller acreage. And I think something else too is like, this is a great thing to stack on if you've got a vegetable operation. Maybe you've got 2 or 3 acres and you've got an acre in production. I think stacking on a broiler enterprise makes all kinds of sense, because then you're leveraging your customer base for another enterprise.
If we think about somebody doing it for themselves already, or somebody who wants to do it for themselves, I'm health conscious. I'm not afraid to get my hands dirty, literally, and raise my own birds. I want to take control of my own food. If you look at what you're saying, this hybrid model of raise your own, sell some, and somebody can go out, get your chicken tractor plans. They can split that batch between what they have, what they want to keep, and then sell the rest. If somebody goes out and buys your chicken tractor plans, which we have on the site at grassfedlife.co, how many birds can they raise in a batch? How much are they going to be out building the chicken tractor? So at the end of the day, they can say we only did 1 batch, here's what we'd be looking at.
The materials for that chicken tractor, we'll just shoot high for conversation's sake. We'll say it's $400 if you go buy everything brand new, right? It's probably going to be quite a bit less than that, but $400, you can run about 80 birds in that chicken tractor. That's pushing the envelope a little bit, but you can put that many birds in there. Your costs are going to be higher, sure. we're going to say maybe it's, it's not $12 a bird. Let's say it's $16 a bird, right? But if you're going to keep, 40 birds and then you're going to sell 40 birds, you're 40 of those at $25 a bird. I mean, that's $1,000, and you've probably only got $600 in your chickens. So there's your $400 to offset the cost of the chicken tractor. And sure, you're going to buy some crates, but you do that a couple of times, all the equipment's bought and paid for.
Yeah, so it's a nice way to try, to dabble, to get your feet wet with the lure of some attractive upside for somebody who wants to seriously do it part-time and scale it up, do multiple batches of a year, and add a decent amount of money to your bank account at the end of the year. And also attractive if you want to really scale up and go full-time with it or big. Now, when you think going big, there's kind of two levels. There's the level you're at and the level that Primal Pastures is at. We have that workshop coming up at Primal Pastures here in March. When you look at what Primal Pastures does and how they've scaled from just $2,000 and something like 100 chicks to where they are now, how do you view them and what they're doing as different than you? Because I think they're really the next level beyond you in terms of how a small farm advances and moves up the scale ladder.
Yeah, so like the big difference between the two of us, like when I wanted to go do this, when I decided I was going to go do this, like Paul, I tried to find somebody to go in on this with me. And I didn't have any takers. Everybody thought I was nuts. And so it's kind of like, all right, well, if I'm going to do this, it's going to be me, myself, and I. And I got to go do it all alone. And, Paul came at this from a totally different standpoint. I mean, he went into it with someone else. So immediately they knew they had to scale up because they were trying to provide for two families from day one. I've always kind of kept things here at a manageable scale for myself. I mean, really, until my back injury a couple of years ago, I didn't need any help with any aspect of the chicken operation except to load them up, to haul them to the butcher, and then my wife would always help me put them into the freezer. That's really kind of a two-person job. Paul's operation is totally different in that they're providing jobs for people. They're supporting multiple families. They've really taken scaling things up to a whole new level. But again, it was intentional because from day one, the intent wasn't just to support one family of four. It was to support two families and to grow that business. And, those are the two main differences. And that really boils down to just personal context and like what your goals are. And, Paul didn't have access to land, like he had to figure it out. But, you get started with 5 acres, you can raise a lot of chickens on 5 acres. I mean, I keep saying $10,000 per acre. I'm actually only using about 0.8 acres in a batch of chickens. And we've actually shown profitability up over $11,000, almost $11,500. So, again, you're not going to be there day one. It's going to take a few seasons to get to that point, to that level. But you can do a lot of damage on 5 acres. And then if you want to take it to the next level like Paul did, well, now you've got the clientele and the business and the experience and the know-how and the equipment to go out and lease a bigger chunk of land and not have to, mortgage your entire future on buying a piece of ground, which I can only imagine how much that would cost in Southern California where he is. But if Paul can do this on leased ground in the high rent district of Southern California, like you can do it anywhere. You really don't have an excuse. You can always outbid somebody for a piece of ground. If the going rate around here is 130 and I really need 5 acres, I go in, I offer the farmer $200 an acre. His eyes get really big. I can get that lease tomorrow. What am I overpaying by? $350 for 5 acres when we're talking about grossing $70,000 to $80,000 that's a non-starter for me.
Absolutely. You know, they got really creative. You mentioned land's expensive here in Southern California. It is. I mean, they're building houses everywhere, and houses might start in the high threes in a lot of places where they're operating at. They got creative and went and leased land originally from a horse park where they do horse shows. They had a lot of grass on the grounds. That grass was normally just sitting there because they wanted the place to look free, look pretty. They're irrigating it. So they got creative. Primal worked out a deal with them, and they leased it for a while. They've since moved on to another property, which they lease. So it is possible, if you want to learn more about taking pastured poultry big, and I mean big to the sense of where they ship it nationally at Primal Pastures across the U.S., raised here in Southern California via Pasture Bird. Check out the Growing Your Farm Business Mastermind coming up here in Southern California. You can learn more about that at grassfedlife.co. And if you're just a homesteader or somebody who wants to take the dive this year, then consider the Profitable Pastured Poultry course that we offer at grassfedlife.co. No travel required, and it's a great starting point for somebody who wants to give this a shot, whether that's on the side, part-time, or to eventually scale it up to be the full-time thing. We're going to lead them through everything they need to know, over 7 hours of video. What do you think this course gives somebody as a resource that you didn't have when you started this 12 years ago?
It stitches so many things together because, so you got Joel's book, which is a great resource. It's a great starting point. I feel like this course really stitches everything together because we start to get into marketing and budgeting and putting together spreadsheets. We've got guides, downloadable guides in there to keep you on track. Like there's a checklist you can print off to make sure, okay, I got to go to work. I'm leaving my wife in charge. She's willing to help, but, she doesn't have the knowledge base that I do. Okay, well, you know what? Here's a printable daily checklist that she can go out there or he can go out there or whatever, make sure that all the chores get done. These are the things you're looking for. If there's a problem, this addresses it. There's just a lot of additional little resources in there. That course, it's $299. I promise you, it will pay for itself multiple times. And not just dollars. It will save you more than the cost of the course and mistakes, but the time and the frustration. I think if I had that resource 12 seasons ago, when I first started out, I feel like that would have cut my learning curve by 2 or 3 years, at least. I really do. I think I would have been profitable much faster, and not just profitable much faster, but like a much higher profit faster. It was 2 to 3 years of a lot of frustration trying to figure everything out. And my goal is to shorten the learning curve, right? And to make people successful, because I believe in the mission of real food and healing the land, or I wouldn't be doing this. It shortens that learning curve and it sets you up for success.
I think the real value in that I see it is it gives people a system. It is a do this, then this type process when you're starting. You start that way, you get your operation going, and then you adapt as you need to for your climate, for your market situation. But I know from talking to a lot of people in the farm space over the years, there's a lot of analysis paralysis at the beginning. There's where do I start? There's how do I start? This course addresses all that, giving people a roadmap to get started. And I think the time it's going to save them, the knowledge it's going to give them, will pay for the course. So if you're interested in taking that course this spring to start your pastured poultry enterprise this year, check it out at grassfedlife.co. We'll have a lot more on pastured poultry coming up on the podcast this year. And stay tuned for some other ways that you'll be able to learn more about pastured poultry coming up in February, because Darby and I will have some other opportunities for people that want to get more out of their homestead or their farm coming up. So stay tuned for that secret in February. There you have it, $10,000 an acre pastured poultry, $50 an hour pastured poultry. What do you think about this? Do you like this idea? Do you want to hear more about it? Are there specific areas of pastured poultry that you are struggling with? Are there things on your farm that you think prevent you from making $10,000 an acre profit or making over $50 an hour raising pastured poultry? Both Darby and I would love to hear what those challenges are, what your struggles are, so we can take them on with some of the content that we produce. Maybe that's podcasts, maybe that's videos, maybe that's webinars. Darby's numbers have shown what is possible. So for the people who say it can't be done, the proof is in the numbers. The proof is on the paper. It can be done. If you're not doing it, then it just comes down to figuring out why you're not doing it and seeing if you can circumvent some of those barriers or overcome some of the obstacles to making $10,000 an acre with pastured poultry. If you want to learn more about pastured poultry, we have a whole bunch of resources to allow you to do so. From the upcoming workshop at Primal Pastures with Paul Grieve, to the Profitable Pastured Poultry online course, to the upcoming Grassfed Life Insider, which will debut this February. For more information on all of those things and everything else that we offer, visit grassfedlife.co. That's all for this one. Thanks for listening. Until next time, be nice, be thankful, and do the work.